He wasn't fully awake yet when the wind, sweeping through the town's dusty streets, blew the dry leaves in the yard up against the wall. Stretching his arms like someone just out of bed, Lucas Stein walked with slow, heavy steps, almost done with his morning patrol. The rifle slung over his shoulder felt like it was fighting gravity, but his mind was weighed down by something else. The echo of a quiet argument from the day before kept circling through his head. But then, from behind the stone wall he passed every morning, a voice shattered that silence. "Sir, just for one day, could you be my dad?" It was almost like the wind had carried the voice. He stopped. His left foot was half a step ahead, as if he'd lost his balance. He didn't even turn around. Just hearing the voice was enough. But then the voice came again, this time closer and clearer. "Just for one day. Please." When he turned around, he saw a small face peeking through a gap in the chipped, painted wooden fence. Big eyes locked on him, honest but scared. Little hands looked like they were stuck between the bars. Her hair was the color of golden wheat, braided and hanging down her neck. She couldn't have been more than 5, but there was a seriousness in her face you don't see in a child that age. "What's your name, young lady?" he asked, kneeling down. "Mira," the child whispered. "But most people call me Mimi." Without looking away, Lucas instinctively reached his hand through the iron bars. When Mira touched his hand, there was a cold but trustworthy feeling between them. "Why do you want something like this, Mimi?" he asked. The little girl nodded toward the stone building on the other side of the fence. Through the window, other kids were carefully brushing their hair and fixing their clothes. "Today, the families are coming," she said. "To look, to choose." Something twisted in Lucas's chest. He'd heard about these days, but never like this. Another day when kids are lined up like things for sale, judged by how tall they are, how strong they look, how well they can work. When Mira stopped talking, the silence was louder than ever. "I never had a family," Mira said. "No mom, no dad. I can't even remember. But some of the other kids talk about stuff. One says, my mom used to bake pastries. Another says, my dad took me fishing. I can't say anything. And they always pick the other kids." Lucas cleared his throat and stood up. Without thinking or planning, he just spoke from his heart. "Well then, if it's all right with you, I'd be honored to be your dad for today." The little girl's eyes lit up, but then a shadow of doubt flickered over them. "Really?" she asked. "You're not joking, are you?" "I've never seen a man who jokes around go on patrol at 7 in the morning," Lucas said, smiling. Mira giggled softly, for the first time, and that little giggle was like a ray of sunlight sneaking into Lucas's dark morning. From inside, the voice of an old woman called out, "Mira, hurry up, your hair's still wet." Mira grabbed the fence. "Please, Mr. Lucas, will you come in and tell Miss Elsie that you're my dad?" Lucas thought for a second. Just for one day, he told himself. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't just be one day. Because what he saw in Myra's eyes wasn't just a child hoping for a dad for a day. It was the call of a soul quietly hoping, still refusing to give up. He pushed open the gate. The hinges squeaked. When he stepped inside, it wasn't the ground he felt under his feet, but a sheet of ice cracking right in the middle of his heart. And from that moment on, everything would change. Inside the building, the atmosphere was as orderly as a school day, but as tense as the morning of an exam. Kids lined up along the hallway, clutching their handkerchiefs or stuffed animals, not daring to let them go. Ms. Elsie, her hair tightly pulled back, straightened her apron as she scanned everyone. Her old eyes were searching for just one thing in each child, a look that promised hope. Lucas came in, matching Myra's tiny steps. Even the muddy prints from his boots seemed shy, like a crack in the tired, sterile feeling of the place. His eyes fell on the other kids. Some glanced at him, then looked away quickly. Only a few realized he was the marshal. None of them could guess why he was here. When Ms. Elsie noticed them, her face showed a mix of surprise and annoyance. "Lucas Stein," she said, keeping her voice distant. "It's not usual to see you here this morning." Mira jumped in right away, her voice sounding rehearsed. "Ms. Elsie, this is my dad. He's staying with me today, just for one day." Lucas held Myra's hand tightly. The woman's eyes scanned them, as if she was weighing a lie. There was a moment of silence. Then she sighed and nodded. "I'll allow it for today. But remember, Mira, the line between dreaming and lying is a thin one." The first family arrived at 9:45. The couple stepped down from a carriage pulled by gray horses. and their faces made it clear they were here for business. The woman rubbed her gloved hands together, and the man's eyes scanned the kids like he was picking apples at a market. The children lined up. The girls smoothed out their skirts, and the boys straightened their shirt collars. Mira sat next to Lucas, her hands folded in her lap. She sat up straight, but her eyes grew dimmer with every minute that passed. The first child picked was a big 10-year-old boy. The man looked carefully at his strong arms and the dirt under his nails, then nodded in approval. "He'll be good for milking cows," he said. Lucas's stomach twisted. Mira didn't move. The second family came, and the woman went straight for the smallest girls. One with big, shiny eyes caught her attention right away. "She's just like a little figurine," the woman said. "Would look perfect in the living room." The man next to her just nodded. The child smiled quietly. She didn't have another choice. Mira was third in line. When Ms. Elsie introduced her, her voice didn't shake, but the words came out slower. "This is Evangeline. 7 years old. Clean, quiet, helpful." The woman looked her up and down. "She looks way too serious. Does this child ever smile?" Mira lifted her head. She smiled. At least, she tried to. Her lips turned up, but her eyes stayed frozen. The woman turned away with a mocking tilt of her head. "No, Cole," and she moved on to the other kids. Lucas stood up. Every muscle in his body was tense. This child has been here for 3 years. She wakes up before everyone, makes her own bed, takes care of the sick ones, feeds the little ones. She learned to cook at 3. She didn't have to, but she did, because no one ever told her she'd get chosen one day. The woman paused, but her eyes didn't show a hint of being moved. "But we're not looking for someone to work. We want someone who can make us smile. We need some light in the house. This child, she's like a shadow." They left, and Lucas stood there for a long time. Mira hung her head. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You don't have to be sorry for anything," Lucas said. "Kids like you don't need light. You're already the light yourself." But that moment was just a quick comfort. The fourth family was arriving, and this time, the light in Myra's eyes was really starting to fade. Just then, another family walked in through the front door. The woman was short, but her eyes were kind. The man was quiet, but looked like someone who knew exactly where he stood. They were carrying a bouquet of flowers instead of coming just to look. It felt like they had come to listen. Lucas's gut told him these two were different. Mira didn't even notice them arrive. She rested her head on her knees and waited in silence. But fate hadn't played all its cards yet. The new couple looked around carefully, and unlike the other families, they connected with the kids not just by how they looked, but by actually being present. The woman's name was Clara, and the man's name was Andreas. There wasn't a business-like look in their eyes. There was something in them that had burned in the past, but still hadn't gone out. As Ms. Elsie walked toward them, Lucas instinctively touched Myra's head. The girl was still curled up on her knees, completely silent. But this couple seemed like the type who could see what no one else bothered to look for. Clara spoke with the children one by one, never brushing anyone off, really listening. She placed her hands on her knees, knelt down to their level, and asked simple but genuine questions like, "What colors do you like?" Andreas mostly watched, paying attention to faces and reactions. As he learned their names, he took notes, sometimes making little jokes to make the kids laugh. Their presence changed the whole feeling of the hallway. When Ms. Elsie finally brought them to Mira, the little girl still hadn't lifted her head. "This is Evangeline," she said shortly, "but everyone calls her Mira. She's 7, quiet, but hardworking. She still hasn't been chosen by anyone." Clara knelt down next to Mira. "Hi, Mira," she said softly. "I really love your name. It's like waves, gentle but lasting." Mira looked up. For the first time, there was no judgment on Clara's face, just genuine curiosity. Andreas glanced gently at Lucas. "Are you her father?" he asked, cautiously but kindly. Lucas didn't blink. Mira quickly jumped in, her voice as thin as an invisible string. "Just for today? Only today." Clara smiled. "Sometimes the best relationships start from just a day," she said. Myra's eyes grew wide in surprise. Andreas leaned down. "So, Mira," he said gently, "can you tell us a little about yourself? For example, what do you like to do in the mornings?" Mira hesitated for a moment, then spoke with an unexpected seriousness. "In the mornings, I sweep the kitchen. I heat up soup water before the little ones wake up. If Ms. Elsie is busy, I wash the babies. Then I line up everyone's shoes, because Because if there's a mess, the families look at us badly. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Andreas furrowed his brow and shook his head slowly. All right, he said. All those things are really important, but what do you want? What makes you happy? This time Mira paused. She really stopped. She wasn't ready for that question no one had ever asked her before. Her eyes went to Lucas, and as if she found courage in his gaze, she whispered, I want to be picked not so someone will go, but so someone will stay. The words hung in the air. The silence was so heavy, even the birds outside couldn't be heard. Lucas swallowed the knot in his throat with effort. Clara gently took Myra's hand. We're looking for someone who wants to stay too, she said. At that moment, something new appeared in Myra's eyes. A feeling she didn't recognize. An unexpected hope. But Andreas looked hesitant. Lucas noticed right away. And inside, a battle began. Was something that started this beautifully really going to end with a but? Just then, a voice shouted in panic from inside. The kitchen door swung open and the old woman rushed in, yelling, There's a fire inside. The stove tipped over. The kids are in there. Everyone froze. Ms. Elsie was shocked. The children ran around in a panic. But Lucas leapt into action. He flung his coat like he was drawing a gun and sprinted to the kitchen. Smoke was already rising, and flames could be seen through the crack in the door. There were 3 little kids trapped inside, 2 of them, just babies. The stove had tipped over. The curtains had caught fire. Without hesitation, Lucas ran in. Andreas followed right behind him. Clara was gathering the other children outside. Mira had gotten up and was helping direct the rest of the kids out, pushing down her own fear. Inside, they could hear coughing and a child crying. Lucas used his coat to smother the flames, grabbing a small child with his other arm. Andreas tore down the curtains and picked up a kid who was tangled in them. The last baby was right next to the stove. Lucas burned his knee, but he got the child out. When they came outside, everyone was frozen. Ms. Elsie took the crying kids one by one in her arms. Clara's hands were shaking as she checked Lucas's burned knee, while Mira ran up. Are you okay? She asked. Lucas nodded. Just a scratch. But Mira didn't try to hide the tears running down her cheeks. She wasn't crying about the scratches, she was crying from the fear of losing someone again. Clara and Andreas stayed quiet for a long time. Then Clara took Myra's hand again. Maybe, she said, her voice quiet but clear. Maybe not just for today. But Mira didn't say anything. She didn't take her eyes off Lucas, like she was waiting for him to have the last word. The kids who had been taken out to the yard after the fire were slowly starting to calm down, but the inside of the building still smelled like smoke. While Ms. Elsie checked the babies affected by the smoke, Lucas's wounded knee wouldn't stop bleeding. But it was like he wanted to mask that pain with another, so he never let go of Myra's hand. Clara and Andreas made brief eye contact with Lucas. This time, there wasn't hesitation in their eyes, but respect. Lucas noticed the smudge of soot on Clara's cheek. She had run to help too, holding the children close. These people didn't just want to be a family, they had the courage to carry one. But Mira, she was still silent. As the children were taken into the dining hall, Ms. Elsie started making hot soup for everyone. Clara and Andreas volunteered to help. Andreas got to work fixing the door damaged by the fire, and Clara brushed the kids' hair and rubbed ointment onto their hands. Mira sat in a corner, holding her bowl of soup in both hands, but not drinking. Lucas came over to her. Young lady, all this silence isn't a good sign for you, he said softly. Mira lifted her head. Her eyes looked tired. If these people choose me, she said quietly, will you leave? Lucas paused for a moment. The question sounded like it came from a child, but there was something deeper under it. Belonging, trust, and fear. That fear was the same unnamed emptiness Lucas had felt so many times in his own past. He knelt down, coming to eye level. Mira, this morning, behind the fence, you asked me something, and I said yes. But that answer wasn't just for a day. If I stay, it's not to be with you, but to be there for you. Mira swallowed. But you're not my real dad. Lucas bowed his head. No, I'm not. But you don't need blood to be real. Sometimes just staying is enough. Those words touched the fears that had quietly built up inside Mira. The question she'd kept inside for years, can someone really want me? Was closer to being answered than ever before. An hour later, Ms. Elsie quietly called Lucas over. Clara and Andreas said they want Mira, she told him, and they want to talk to her privately. But Mira wants your permission. Lucas took a deep breath. His feet carried him to Mira. She was sitting under the mulberry tree in the garden. Sunlight filtered through the branches, making her hair shine like gold threads. As he approached, Mira reached out her hand. "They said they're leaving," she said. "But they want to see you too. Together." Lucas felt his heart skip a beat. Clara and Andreas were holding Myra's hands. There was no space left between them, but Myra's other hand was tugging on Lucas's. Clara spoke. "We know how much you mean to Mira, and if you want, we'd like you to come with us too, not just as someone who visits, as part of our family." Something stirred inside Lucas. That quiet, wild loneliness was being replaced maybe for the first time with the idea of a home. But he wasn't sure he deserved it. Mira was waiting for his answer. Andreas spoke in a clear voice. "A child isn't protected just by a roof, but by a heart. And when you came into this child's life, you already did that." Myra's eyes sparkled. "Promise you won't leave?" Lucas nodded. "I won't leave. Wherever you go, I'll be there." At that moment, Clara placed her hands on Myra's shoulders. "We can do this together, if all three of us choose each other." Right then, there was no need for more words. Mira looked at all three of them. Then she slowly nodded. That day, it stopped being just another adoption day. That day became the day a child wasn't chosen, she did the choosing herself. With sunset, the orphanage garden grew quiet. The kids had all gone inside and the doors were shut, but under the mulberry tree, three people were still sitting. Lucas, Clara, and Andreas. And right in the middle of them, little Mira, her eyes still holding the last lines of a story that hadn't finished yet. After a while, Ms. Elsie quietly approached. She had a few papers in her hand. "If you're ready," she said. "We've prepared the documents today. The legal process will take a few days, but tonight will be a turning point in her life." Mira looked at Clara, then at Andreas, and finally turned her eyes to Lucas. "But what about you? Your name isn't on these papers, but you're in my heart." That sentence settled in Lucas's chest like a full glass of water. Clara nodded slightly. "That's why," she said, reaching into her bag. "We have another offer for you." She handed over an envelope. Inside were different documents, guardianship papers, but ones that made him an official part of the family. It wasn't adoption, but gave him a permanent place in Myra's life, guardian and mentor. "If you want, Lucas," Andreas said, "your name could be on these papers as Myra's life guardian, the third pillar of our family." For a moment, Lucas couldn't speak. He had spent years away from people, cities, feelings. He thought he was only going to share a day with someone, and now he was on the edge of a decision that would shape his years. But Myra's eyes said it all. No matter what, she didn't want to be alone. "I didn't take this responsibility just for a day," Lucas said. "If Mira allows, I'll sign these papers with honor." Mira looked down. "It's not just that I allow it," she said. "I choose you." The next day, everyone gathered in the small hall. The soft smell of cake Clara and Andreas had brought was in the air. The other kids watched Mira leave with a mix of sadness and happiness. Ms. Elsie sat quietly in a corner, watching through her glasses. The official papers were laid out on the table. Mira had just started to recognize her name, but couldn't write yet. Lucas bent down and held her hand. "I can't write your name for you," he said. "But if you want, we can draw the letters together." Mira nodded. Her small fingers grabbed the pen, and with Lucas's hand guiding hers, they wrote it out together, Evangeliani. Then Lucas signed, Clara, Andreas. And finally, Ms. Elsie witnessed it. But the moment after the ceremony was even more special. Mira turned to Lucas. "You said you'll stay with me, but I know so little about you." Lucas smiled. Sometimes it doesn't take years to know someone. Sometimes a smile, a silence, a touch is enough. But Mira was stubborn. "I still want to know. Like, what did you dream of when you were a kid?" Lucas leaned his head back. There was a short silence. Then, "I wanted someone to choose me too, but nobody ever came." Mira took his hand. "But I came." That sentence touched the emptiest place in Lucas's life, like the first drop of rain soaking into a cracked stone, slow but lasting. As Clara watched them, she leaned toward Andreas. "They're going to heal each other," she said. By evening, a small suitcase was ready for Mira. 2 dresses, a sketchbook, the old pillow Ms. Elsie had given her, and a little wooden horse Lucas had carved for her. Before they set off, Mira turned one last time to the orphanage garden. She walked to the edge of the fence and slid her fingers between the bars. Clara asked, Did you forget something? Mira shook her head. No, but yesterday I wished for a life from behind this fence. Today, I'm leaving through it into a life. Clara couldn't answer. Her eyes filled with tears. Lucas came up behind her. All right, Mira, I'm coming with you, but I have one condition. Mira looked surprised. What is it? Lucas smiled. From now on, we'll have tea together every morning, and you'll tell me something, anything. Promise. Mira nodded quickly. Promise. And with her small hands, she reached out and took Lucas's fingers. Clara and Andreas watched them. In that moment, four people began to walk in the same direction, uniting four different paths for the first time. The first morning, when Mira opened her eyes in her new bed, in the middle of clean sheets, for a few seconds, she couldn't remember where she was. The wooden beams on the ceiling, the flower-patterned curtain on the window, the little bookshelf on the wall. None of these belonged to her. But then she heard the sounds from the next room. Clara humming a song, Andreas setting breakfast plates, and Lucas. Yes, that very familiar soft cough. She smiled. She put on her pajamas, slipped her feet into her slippers. When she stepped into the hallway, a family of three was waiting for her around the kitchen table. Good morning, young lady, said Lucas, holding a cup in his hand. We had a promise, remember? Mira nodded. I was going to tell something every morning. What should I tell today? Clara threw a shawl over her shoulder. If you want, don't start today. Start on whatever day feels like your day. Today, just live. That morning, having breakfast together, watering flowers together, and meeting the horses for the first time, these were moments when life started from zero for Mira. But nothing created a stronger bond than what happened that afternoon. Andreas opened the old chest in the back of the barn. He took out a small, slightly faded saddle. This belonged to our son, he said. He never got to use it. But now, we wanted to go to the right person. Mira stared without blinking. The saddle felt like a sacred relic to her. I never asked your son's name, said Mira. Elias, Clara said, her voice trembling. But we always called him Eli. Mira leaned down, touched the saddle. Then she whispered softly, Hello, Eli. Don't worry. I won't leave your family alone. Lucas watched this scene from afar. He rubbed his eyes. For the first time in his life, he was witnessing a child hold grief with such grace. As weeks went by, Mira became not just part of a house, but part of a new life. She started going to school, and her teachers soon admired her intelligence. Every evening, Mira would share her day with Lucas. She was no longer the child who said, Will you be my dad for a day? Now, she had someone beside her. Someone she always believed would be there, and now knew really was. One day, her teacher came up to Clara and said, This girl, she doesn't just learn. She teaches, too. There's something in her eyes that turns even loss into hope. And then, the big day arrived. In the courtroom, a small circle of 4 chairs formed around Mira. After the judge signed the last documents, he turned to Mira. Evangeline Mira, from this moment, you are legally part of this family. I want to ask you something. Are you ready? Mira straightened up. I'm ready. The judge smiled. Did you make this choice? Yes, I chose them. Because first they saw me, and then they loved me without waiting. That day, a table was set up on the house porch for a celebration. Cakes, flowers, balloons. But the most meaningful thing was the wooden sign Lucas had carved himself. Myra's home. From one day to forever, Clara kissed her on the forehead. Andreas touched her shoulder. Lucas quietly approached and handed Mira a small box. Inside was an old, silver-colored necklace. 3 words were engraved on it. Never, just one day. Mira looked up. Was this yours? Lucas nodded. Now it's yours. Because you gave me a task for one day. But that day gave me a lifetime. At the end of the day, Mira sat on the rocking chair at the edge of the porch. The sky was turning purple. Clara was reading a book. Andreas was feeding the horses. Lucas sat beside Mira, quietly holding her hand. Papa Lucas, said Mira, why do people always talk about blood ties when it comes to family? Lucas thought for a moment. Because blood is easy to see. But to see the real bond, you have to look at the heart. Mira rested her head on his shoulder. I see you with my heart. That's why you'll always be like a dad to me. Really, forever. That night, when Lucas looked up at the stars, for the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged somewhere. And Mira, she finally knew the answer to the question she had asked from behind that fence.